Hey runners, just another running coach here with my post-race reflection on my first race in over 1.5 years, the City Tri-Run's New York City Summer Half. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Vlogs like these are a bit unusual here since I really try to focus more on training related topics to help you with your running. But nevertheless, here we are. I ran a race and it's time to look back on what happened, what I learned, and how I feel about it. And if it's helpful to you in any way to see how I approach things and reflect on things, great. By the way, this shirt is a size small. It's still a little bit large on me. What do you think? I don't know. So the last video I made was about my pre-race thoughts going into this half, and I shared what my doable, primary, and stretch goals were. These goals were based on how I was feeling going into the race, based on my training, the expected conditions like the weather and the course, and how the race fit into my long-term goals for the rest of the year. And to give you a really brief summary of all of that, my doable goal was to just get out there and have fun and not blow up. My primary goal was to break 1 hour and 22 minutes, and my stretch goal was to break 1 hour and 20 minutes. I decided not to go for a personal best this time around because, again, this was my first race in a super long time, had to shake the rust off. And actually, I hadn't really been thinking about it, but this was my first race since my GI surgery over a year ago. So this was the hardest effort run that I've done since they cut me open and took parts of me out. Another reason why I didn't want to go for a PR was because the race is in August and it was a 9 a.m. start, which means it was really hot out there. And the last reason was, in terms of my long-term goals, I didn't really want to take myself out of commission. August is a really important month for New York City Marathon training, right? You know, I want to build up the long runs over the rest of this month, so I didn't want to try going for a PR, overexert myself, and not make it. That would have just been like a worst case scenario for me because I would have felt bad, I would have had less fun, and I wouldn't have been able to train as well the rest of this month. So now that we are beyond the finish line, I'm super happy to report that I finished in 1:21:09, which was also good enough for a 3rd place overall finish. Needless to say, I am really satisfied with how this went, and it was a blast just being back out there, especially because I got to run it with my friends who also did an amazing job. Among them, we had 2 first-time half marathoners and an awesome 4-minute PR. So congrats, Dan, Greg, and Marissa. You guys rock. And we even had our own little cheer squad, which was really awesome and really helpful in those tough last few miles in the heat. So if you're watching out there, friends and fam, thank you. Love you guys. And by the way, here's the finisher medal that we got. Really cool design. Shout out to City Tri-Runs for putting up a really great race. Thank you guys. It's really nice to be able to run a half after so long. Now, there's definitely a few things I want to cover in this race report, so let's dive right into it, starting with my pacing strategy and how closely I was able to follow it. Something I didn't show you in the pre-race video was this guy, because I hadn't made it yet, which is basically a homemade pacing wristband. If you've ever run a big race, you've probably seen something like this before. They usually hand them out pre-printed at the expo with mile-by-mile splits, based off of different time goals. So let's say you're running the New York City Marathon and your goal is 4 hours, they'll have pre-printed pace wristbands for you with the splits for 4 hours. They'll have 4 hours 10 minutes, 4 hours 20 minutes, and so on. But those are usually all even splits, and if you're like me and you need those first few miles to warm up the engine a little bit, having even splits on your wrist doesn't really do you much good. I actually find that it makes me more anxious and more likely to start too fast because I don't want to feel like I'm falling behind right from the start if I start out a little more conservatively. So if I'm familiar with the course or I have an elevation chart like I showed you in the last video, what I'll do is come up with my own personal mile-by-mile strategy based on where I think I can attack the course most effectively and where I should hold back so I don't tire myself out prematurely. So this here is just a copy of the one that I actually wore during the race. The one I actually wore is very disgusting and I threw it out. But if you look really closely, what I like to do is put the total duration in one column so I know where I stand in terms of my overall time, and my mile pace in the other column so I know what my pace needs to be for that specific mile. If you've never tried this before at all, I really highly recommend it since it's an easy way for you to save a lot of mental energy during the race, since you just need to look at your wrist instead of trying to do a bunch of math. And it's a great way to ensure you're running your own race rather than chasing others down or following a generic pacing strategy that doesn't take your strengths into account. Now, let's see what actually happened. So here's a map from my Garmin watch with the course outlined, and on the left side in the first column is what my watch recorded for each mile split. On the right side is my pacing strategy for my primary goal, 122. That's what I just showed you on the wristband. Now, it's very worth noting that for some reason, my watch seems to have shortchanged me a bit with the distance, so it's a little hard to know exactly how accurate these splits are, since there also weren't any mile markers along the course for me to cross-reference. But for the most part, it looks like I started out the race a little more conservatively than I planned, and in miles 4 and 5, I started to crank things up a bit and made up the lost time. I did slow down a bit in the end, but we'll come back to that in a minute. One wildcard factor that definitely played a role in this race was the competition, and as crazy as it sounds, the possibility of actually winning the race. Now, you all know my philosophy is not about first place, and I think I've mentioned in almost every video on this channel that winning races and comparing yourself to others are almost never worth focusing on, and I'll say that here as well. Winning this race was not my focus, and it wasn't something that I expected to be able to do. That being said, I'd be lying if I told you a little part of me wasn't secretly hoping that I would have a shot, and I told myself that if I did, I was going to go for it as long as it didn't conflict with my actual goals, including having fun and not blowing up. So as it turned out, around the 5-mile mark, I did manage to actually take the lead, and it kind of perfectly coincided with where our cheer squad was. So as you can imagine, I was feeling pretty pumped up and excited, especially because I had actually never held the lead in a race before, let alone won a race. So in a way, this was kind of uncharted territory for me. However, something I learned very quickly was that chasing the lead and being in the lead are two completely different challenges, and let me tell you, being the leader is not as fun as it sounds. It's lonely, you get this compulsive urge to look over your shoulder constantly, and I kept having this weird sensation where I thought the sound of my own footsteps were coming from someone behind me. So this was one area where my inexperience definitely got the better of me. I think the main thing was that once I was in the lead, there was a certain change in mentality, and it went from racing to win to racing not to lose. And there's definitely a big difference in how much fun you're having when you're racing to win, because the definition of winning is something that you can just come up with. But all of a sudden, when you're actually literally winning, you don't want to lose. You don't want to give up that spot. And all of a sudden, it ups the stakes in a way that is it's very unfamiliar to me. So it was kind of interesting, you know, having been running for over 10 years and having never really been in that situation, it was kind of interesting for me to see what that was like. Anyway, the eventual winner did catch me around mile 9, and I gotta give him a ton of credit. He ran a really impressive negative split, and after he passed me, he did not slow down at all. In fact, he actually sped up a lot, and at that point I figured even if I tried to catch up to him, he probably still had another gear left in him, and he probably would have outkicked me to the finish line. So I came to peace with that, and I went back to focusing on my own race. The good news was that I was still solidly on pace for 122, and since the stretch goal of 120 didn't mean that much to me, I decided to just keep it at a steady effort the rest of the way. One last fun moment was at the very last minute when the eventual second place guy came up from behind me and challenged me to a last minute sprint. And I don't mind this at all. I actually love it because when this happens, you know, even though we're not competing at this point, it gives both runners a nice surge of energy to finish on. And this guy did it purely out of camaraderie, not in a taunting way. I'm sure he wanted to see me finish strong. I was happy to push him to finish strong too. The funny thing was I actually finished about 5 seconds ahead of him, and the race organizers must have been really confused because they held out a finish tape for me as if I had actually won the whole race. Of course, in the end, it turned out that because this guy behind me had started the race even further behind me, he had a faster overall chip time. So based on how you score the race by gun time or chip time, the results could have been flipped. But honestly, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with the fact that he ran a faster race, so he totally deserved second. In terms of myself, I beat my time goal, I had fun, I didn't blow up. getting on the podium was just the cherry on top for me. So overall, I have to say I'm pretty pleased with how well this race went, and I'm feeling way more confident about my upcoming training for the New York City Marathon. It was also just a really nice event, and again, it was so great to be able to race with friends, especially after such a long time, and to see two of them run their first half marathons and to see a really solid PR in person was just super exciting. Congrats again, guys, on a great race. All right, I think that's enough about me for a while. Next time, we're going back to actually useful videos to help you with your training. And in the meantime, if you have any running related questions or video topic suggestions, or if you're looking for one-on-one coaching in New York City or virtual coaching anywhere in the US, feel free to reach out. Until next time, happy running.